Okay, as we ended class yesterday, I gave you a homework assignment to figure out some examples of some of the subclasses of the biological molecules. And if you remember, we came up with three subclasses of carbohydrates, and that's monosaccharides, disaccharides, and polysaccharides. The lipids, fatty acids, phospholipids, and steroids. And remember, the proteins we're going to delve into a little bit in greater detail. Remember, there's different kinds of, you have your primary, tertiary, secondary, and etc. for the different kinds of proteins. And then we'll get into that in greater detail when we talk about protein synthesis, etc. All right, and especially when we talk about enzymes. All right, and then finally, our nucleic acids, and you were good at that. We found DNA, RNA, and the one that was surprising to you was this thing called ATP. Probably haven't heard of that much yet, but we'll get into that even farther down the line when we talk about photosynthesis and cellular respiration. All right, good. Let's take a look at the carbohydrates. Okay, what were some of the examples that you came up with for carbohydrates? Yeah, and this one, when we get farther down, you'll notice that glucose is going to be very, very important to this whole the carbohydrates, because what we call the glucose, when we get to the structure in our lesson for later on tomorrow, and that will be that the glucose is going to be what we call a monomer, and the rest of the types of carbohydrates are going to be called polymers. All right, let's keep on going. What's another kind of disaccharide? Yeah, famous one. What you get on your table, we call that actually sucrose. And so then we get into the energy storage, and those are polysaccharides made up of many glucoses usually. And the one we use for energy storage, you probably know that, eat potatoes, that's starch. And then another important one that you probably didn't even know was a carbohydrate, and that is cellulose. And cellulose is the most, of all the different kinds of biological molecules, that's probably the most common biological molecule that you'll find in living things. All right, let's continue on to lipids. Energy storage, for that part, you know that I got lots of it right here. Those are your fats. Okay, cell membranes made up of phospholipids. And what did anybody find out what we use for phospholipid? Yeah, it's in the cell membrane. We call that the phospholipid bilayer, and we'll talk about a little bit more about that when we get into the cell structure and the cell membrane. Right, and hormones. Yeah, hormones are lipids. Steroids. Anybody got an example of a steroid? Testosterone. And another one that maybe you didn't know was that. It's, yeah, cholesterol. Okay, and I bet you probably know this one. Famous protein for movement. Everyone likes it. We call that muscles. Yeah, when you're eating that big hamburger or you're having that big steak, you're eating muscle. Right, and one of the transport example we had was hemoglobin. And how about chemical reactions? Probably one of the most important types of proteins. We're going to go into that in greater detail later too, like we said. And those are what? Yeah, enzymes. Okay, and let's get into heredity, and we'll talk about the DNA. Where do you find DNA? Yeah, we find the DNA in your genes. Okay, and examples of different kinds of protein synthesis. We have a different kind of, it's kind of like DNA, but it's single-stranded instead of double-stranded. That's RNA, and there's different kinds of that. For now, we'll call it transfer RNA, messenger RNA. And then another one, if you can fit it in there, we have rRNA. And that's ribosomal armor. That's what makes up the ribosomes inside the cell. All right, and finally, the one you didn't know about, where ATP is simply going to be called ATP. All right, what we're going to do for tomorrow's lesson is we're going to get into the different kinds of structures in these, and you'll notice that like in all things, that living things are smart. They've taken we had our functional groups as far as the chemicals we talked about. Functional groups are going to be made into these biological molecules, and they form up monomers, and the monomers will form polymers, and each one of these have a certain kind of structure. And we'll talk about this. This is one big, huge thing we'll talk about. Structure has to do with function, and we're going to learn about a lot about that later. Things are the way they are because they have a certain function. Because they have a certain function, you're going to notice they're going to have a certain kind of structure.